All right, so we're back here on another Couch Coach Live special edition. So this week of our Power Five preview, we're going to be talking about the Big 12, aka RIP to the Big 12. so we got our guy once again, Zach from the Blue Bloods podcast. What's going on, Zach?
Oh man, not much, man. Glad to be back. Do the last go around for the Big 12 before everything falls apart.
Yeah, and like you said, once again, like we talked about our pre-show, yeah, this is a conference, and we talked about it last week too, where this is the beginning of the end for this conference. So the first question I definitely want to ask is, obviously we know the news of yesterday where officially the SEC pretty much said, hey, you guys can come on in 2025. The first question is your thoughts on the move for Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC.
Man, listen. So I get it. Part of me is a little bit of a traditionalist, where it's like I am gonna miss the Big 12. It's a weird move, but for me, being an SEC fan, man, how can you not get a little bit excited to see Oklahoma versus Alabama, Texas versus LSU? In all the games we get, and then you also get the fact that the Texas A&M rivalry is going to be back to the forefront of college football. That you have to love it. And the biggest question I have is how the SEC is going to incorporate this. Are they going to stick with the divisions and move Alabama and Auburn to the East, which they should already be at, and then bring Texas and Oklahoma into the West to replace them and have that sort of dynamic? Or we've had the rumors of the pod dynamic where there's 4-team pods all throughout the conference. You have a cross-division pod, and it works like that. I'm interested to see how the SEC does that. But, man, when you talk about the money, the exposure, the domination that the SEC could experience by adding Texas and Oklahoma to the already most dominant conference of college football, man, as a college football fan, you have to get a little bit excited for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I looked at the numbers and you think to yourself, the SEC is probably going to be $1 billion conference when it's all said and done with, even in the first year in 2025. So now my next question is the other teams. We talked about the other teams in the Big 12. I've seen instance where like some teams that go to they projected to the SEC, not SEC, but the ACC, the Big 10 or what have you. So what are your thoughts on the other remainders of the Big 12?
I think it's going to be interesting. So there's a lot of rumors out there. There's a lot of moving parts. So the AAC, which in case you guys don't know is the conference with Cincinnati, Memphis, UCF, Houston, they're trying to absorb everybody else and make their own super conference so they can move up to the Power Five. That's the plan for the AAC. Now, the Big Ten, according to all reports from ESPN, Fox Sports, everything like that, is trying to find a way to get Iowa State and Kansas to the Big Ten. That's like their first two choices. And then West Virginia's been in talks with the ACC because that makes the most sense geography-wise. And a lot of those teams from the old Big East find themselves in the ACC. So West Virginia is kind of like that lost Big East child that somehow wound up in the middle of the country, and we don't know how it really works. So I like to see West Virginia and Notre Dame become those ACC teams. They get to, the Big Ten gets to, and then the Pac-12 really kind of has their choice. Now, I know TCU has already expressed interest in jumping to the Pac-12. Now, which team do they bring with them? Do you pick a Baylor and get another Texas team? Do you go for a Kansas State? Do you go for maybe an Oklahoma State? I don't know. And then there's also the possibility, man, of all these group of 5 teams that could bandwagon with the Big 12 leftover teams to get to the Power 5. So when you look at it, how about someone like a Boise State moving to the Pac-12? How about a Cincinnati moving to the Big 10 or ACC? A UCF moving to the ACC? There's going to be a lot of moving parts, man. And for me, if I was the SEC, just to even increase my footprint more, I would target Oklahoma State and Baylor to come along with Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC. You bring Oklahoma State because you keep that rivalry in, you increase your footprint in the Midwest, and you bring Baylor just because, one, their football team has been pretty good recently. And think about how much basketball success you can bring too, in terms of women's basketball always dominating. And then their men's team just won their first national title. So you bring a lot to it. And what kind of coaching conference will we have with the coaches if you get Mike Gundy from Oklahoma State, you get Dave Aranda, who was the former LSU defensive coordinator, Sarkisian, you get Lincoln Riley, you already got Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, and all this. So I really, really think that would be the move. But for me, I think the most likely possibility, if I had to put money on it, is the AAC absorbs all these teams, or the other conferences just kind of split among the rest of them.
Yeah. And also, huge shout out to our guy, Josh, the Golden Domer. So would you break the conference into 4?
I know a lot of people don't like the pod scenario, and that's kind of what that is. I would, because, I mean, man, if you add 4 more teams, man, are you going to have an 18-person conference with divisions of like 9 teams? I just think that's too many. And the big criticism, Couch Coach, of the SEC is that, Auburn didn't play Missouri until like 2019 at Missouri because the way the away and home schedules work for cross-division rivals. You have to find a way where more SEC teams play other ones from other divisions. So I think if you avoid the pod scenario, man, you might have Florida not playing Oklahoma for like 10 years or something like that. So I think the pod is the best way to ensure everyone gets a shot at each other. And then there's been talk of, if you have the pod scenario, you have like a small 4-team playoff for the SEC to determine the champion. And then I get it. People are like, there's too many playoffs, too many teams. The more college football we can get, the better for me. And I would love to have more games, more competition, and it would just increase the SEC recruiting blueprint. And it would also help other sports by bringing these other teams in. So yes, I probably would break the conference into 4 and/or pods.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the possibility we talk about West Virginia going to the ACC. You have those old Big East rivalries: Virginia Tech versus West Virginia, Miami versus West Virginia.
Pitt versus West Virginia is a huge one.
West Virginia, yes. So, yeah, definitely. Those would be definitely intriguing. Those matchups, but yeah, most definitely. So let's shift gears to actual potential final Big 12, the meat and potatoes of the preview. So let's see. What are the games to watch in the Big 12 this year?
So, I picked 4 of them, and, each 4 has like a unique description. So the first one, and this one's probably going to determine who is that number 1 team going into the championship. And that's Iowa State versus Oklahoma, November 20th. Usually these matchups kind of fall in the middle of the season or early in the Big 12. This is the second to last regular season weekend of the season. Iowa State, Oklahoma matched off in the Big 12 championship last year. They're both the favorites to return this year. Iowa State returns like 20 starters to the team from a team that was 1 or 2 plays away from winning the Big 12 last year. And then you got Oklahoma, who just revamped and reloaded that team. So that game is probably a qualifying game for the Big 12 championship. The winner's guaranteed, and hopefully the loser is probably still going to be in a pretty good position to make it back to Arlington. But the other one is Kansas State versus Oklahoma. And that one might be weird for some people, but if you know your history, Kansas State has been just smacking Oklahoma in their past 2 matchups. Kansas State was that Achilles heel that really kept Oklahoma out of the playoffs last year. The year before, it really put a damper on their playoff resume. Oklahoma and Lincoln Riley are going to have to find a way to beat Kansas State. And it's going to be a tough game this year. They have to go into Manhattan, where that crowd is going to be riding high off of 2 wins over Oklahoma in the past 2 years, including one over like a number 2 ranked Oklahoma 2 years ago in Manhattan. It's a tough place to play. Oklahoma doesn't have a great history in Manhattan, especially as Kansas State has improved their program. I think Oklahoma, Kansas State's a big one. And then the other 2 are ones that are going to be kind of determining who the contenders are. I'm looking at TCU, Texas, the weekend of the 2nd, the same weekend as Kansas State, Oklahoma. TCU, Couch Coach, I don't know if you know this, has beaten Texas like 11 of like the last 13 times they've played. They have Texas's number. They beat them last year to really put a huge damper on the Longhorn season. I really, really think TCU, if they beat Texas, will put Steve Sarkisian immediately into a little bit of like, did we make the right hire here? And that team just plays physical. I think a lot of people always overlook TCU. And the final game's a non-conference game, and I'm going to use the same argument I used on our Pac-12 episode, man. The Big 12 kind of has a image problem in terms of competitiveness. Oklahoma State plays Boise State September 18th. It's like the 3rd week of the year. If Boise State goes out there and beats Oklahoma State, you're going to hear the same argument used against Oklahoma as they're trying to get into the playoffs about, man, that conference is terrible. That conference is bad. Oklahoma State was a top 10 team last year. And so if they fall to a Mountain West foe like Boise State, the Big 12 is going to be in the same boat as the Pac-12, where it's, man, it's how good is this conference, from top to bottom? Because you already got Kansas dragging down the mean over there, probably going to lose to Coastal Carolina by 30. So Oklahoma State, Boise State, the Big 12 is going to have to get some bonus points for beating a tough out-of-conference opponent.
Yeah, definitely some great matchup to watch. Now, the players to watch, who you got?
Man, you know how I do, man. I got to get a defensive guy and an offensive guy in here. Too many people talk offense. Nick Bonito. If you don't know that name, get to research him because he's probably going to be a top 5 pick next year. Like that guy is that good. He's an edge rusher out of Oklahoma, and he was number 1 in the nation last year, guys, in pass rush grade by Pro Football Focus with a 94. He had the highest pass rush win rate at almost 30%. So on 30% of the snaps he was rushing the passer, he was beating his matchup. That's by far the number 1 mark in 2020. He had a 25% pressure rate on his rushes. And last year in only 9 or 10 games, he had 9 sacks and 11.5 tackles for loss. The guy is long. He's explosive. He's exactly what you want in an edge defender. And he probably, I would say he might be the best defensive player Oklahoma has had in probably 10 years. So he's a monster. And on offense, listen, you might miss this guy. And I know a lot of you guys might not even know this kid's name. He's only 5'5". Deuce Vaughn, Kansas State running back. He was voted the best running back in the Big 12 unanimously after last season. He is 5'5", but he totaled over 1,000 yards, 9 total touchdowns in 2020, and that was as a true freshman. So this is only his 2nd year in the offense. He ranked top 10 in receiving grade for running backs, yards per route for running backs, broken tackles, and explosive plays out the backfield. Deuce Vaughn is like this is the same school that had Darren Sproles, so they know how to utilize him. He hides behind that offensive line, but the thing is, once he sees a crease, once he sees a hole, he can put his foot in the ground and explode through the crease, and you can't stop him. And his low center of gravity allows him to run through bigger defenders and break arm tackles. Deuce Vaughn is going to make a run at the Doak Walker Award this year, and I'm so excited to see what he does for the Wildcats up there in Manhattan.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, 5'5". Wow.
Oh yeah, he's tiny looking, but listen, he weighs like 175 though of pure muscle. Yeah. He's a bowling ball, man. He's solid. I'm telling you, he's a head knocker at 5'5", and it's so interesting to watch.
Absolutely. So, who are your sleepers?
Man, this one was such a hard one because in the Big 12, like I feel like you have easily like your top 2 in Iowa State, Oklahoma. Some people are saying Texas, and then you have a lot of teams that lost a lot. But a team that lost a lot that I'm really excited to see is TCU. And I get it. They lost their 2 best secondary players in Trevon Merrick and Ardarius Washington to the draft, but they still have an elite secondary. They rank top 5 at every single positional unit in the Big 12. So they're consistent. They might have, right behind Oklahoma, the best receiving core in the Big 12. This is the first time Gary Patterson, because Gary Patterson always throws an excellent defense on the field because he's a defensive-minded head coach. And those old TCU Rose Bowl teams really were built on the back of a strong defense. The offense this year is going to catch up, though, man. Max Duggan is back for another year. I really think he's underrated as a quarterback in the Big 12. And my player to watch, though, for this team is Zach Evans. If that name sounds familiar, he was the 5-star running back who committed to Georgia, and then like his NIL got lost, and then he was supposedly committed to LSU. That got lost, and he just kind of got caught in the shuffle. Well, he was a top 10 player just a recruiting class ago. He's probably the best offensive player TCU's had in a minute. Zach Evans, if he can get going at the running back position and live up to the potential that a lot of the scouts think he has, I really, really think Zach Evans and Max Duggan could take this option offense to a huge new level for TCU and make them a run-first team, which means they control the clock, keep that defense fresh late into games. And if that TCU defense is fresh late into games, and it's going to be a problem for the Big 12. They have Texas's number. I think they're right behind Iowa State in terms of pure talent. And if they can catch Oklahoma on a bad week, you could be talking about TCU winding up in that Big 12 championship with something to prove. And so they're my number one sleeper. And then I'll give you an honorable mention, Kansas State. Now, I know a lot of y'all are like, man, they were terrible at the end of last year. They were. But after that Oklahoma game, which they beat Oklahoma in Norman, their starting quarterback got hurt. And they were starting a true freshman who was never supposed to see the field. They lost like 3 secondary players like 2 weeks in a row. And they've just had so many injuries and things come up that Kansas State really didn't have a good chance after Skylar Thompson went down. The defensive line and linebacking unit for Kansas State should be at the top of the game. The safety spot, though, is why they're not my number one sleeper, because I don't know what they're starting at safety. Me and you might be a safety upgrade over what they might be returning. So their safety spot's a huge question mark. They need a lot to happen. And Chris Kleiman comes in for North Dakota State, and he's been able to show a lot where you can beat the Oklahomas, you can upset this team, that team. You have to win week in and week out. You can't lose 70 to something to Texas and Iowa State to end the season. If he can get better consistency week to week, then I think Kansas State could be something. But TCU is absolutely the number one sleeper in the Big 12.
Absolutely. And I got another question from I got Josh, a.k.a. the Golden Doma. Shout out to Notre Dame. so he asked, do you think West Virginia is a dark horse in the Big 12 this year?
Possibly, but no, because they lost so many transfers, man, that it really, really hurt this team. Their quarterback position is a big question mark. They lose Tyke Smith, who might have been one of the best defensive players in the conference, to Georgia. They lose his right-hand man, Drayshawn Miller, to Auburn to transfer. Then they lose Darius Stills on the defensive line. I mean, their defensive line and secondary, man, ranked last and second to last in the conference. Like, when your defensive line ranks below Kansas, man, dude, are you even going to be able to get pressure? If they have a sack this year, that's an upgrade if you're behind Kansas in a positional ranking. They're outside the top 6 in every single thing except receiving. The quarterback play has just been inconsistent. Listen, Jared Doege, I get it. He's all right, but his accurate pass rate was not even 50% last year. And he had a lot of time to throw. The offensive line was pretty good. He's not great down the field. He can't stretch the field in either direction. He's very one-dimensional. You either got to get him right over the middle or in the backfield. He doesn't have a live arm, and I'm just very concerned that he's not going to be able to push the ball down the field. And, man, as much as this conference has become more defensive focused, if you can't push the ball down the field in the Big 12, you have no chance of winning. They have a very tough schedule too, man. You get Maryland and Virginia Tech as 2 of your out-of-conference games. That's going to be super tough to get out of there with a 2-0 record. And then right after Virginia Tech, you have to go travel to Norman and face Oklahoma. And then you also get TCU and Iowa State back-to-back. and then you get TCU, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and Texas all back to back. It's going to be real tough for West Virginia to, I think, make a run this year. And it's all really because their quarterback play is questionable and their defense was ravaged by transfers and players off to the draft.
Yeah. And that is definitely a rigorous first two games out of conference.
Yeah. Virginia Tech. Listen, I'm all for competitive football as a fan. If I was a coach, I'm not calling Virginia Tech to schedule a game. That's just one of those teams that I don't want to go into Blacksburg and have to go face you at night with Enter Sandman playing that stadium rocking. I'll pass every week. I'd rather go play Alabama and Bryant-Denny.
Yeah, I tell you, because I mean, it's a tough place. It's a tough place, like you said. It's even tough, even at a 12 o'clock kickoff, much less at night, where that's when that's that bread and butter. It's really at night, especially during the turn of the century and what have you. Like, it's a very magical place, but like you said, it's a house of horrors for opposing teams. But yeah. You're right. But yeah. So rounding out this week's preview for the Big 12, the $1 million question that we always ask you on these conference previews: who will win the Big 12?
Man, I think it's a no-brainer, and I'm going to shock a lot. I guess I'll shock a lot of people on the back end of it. Oklahoma's winning the Big 12, and it's not even going to be close. Like, I talked about Iowa State and TCU competing. They're competing for second because Oklahoma this year, man, they have their best team since probably that 02 or 03 team that won the title with Josh Heupel as quarterback. And Josh Heupel's a coach now at Tennessee. That's how long it's been. This team is so good from top to bottom, man. I mean, when I talk about how good Spencer Rattler looked down the stretch last year, yes, he struggled in the Texas game. Yes, he struggled against Iowa State. But as he got comfortable in the system, I mean, he took his game to another level. And their cornerbacks, like their secondary is the weakest unit, but they rank first in every other unit in the Big 12. Quarterbacks, running back room, receiving, offensive line, defensive line, linebackers, they're first in the Big 12 in terms of talent. Secondary ranks fifth. I think they're going to be able to overcome it. If they can replace Trey Norwood at that CV1 spot, they'll be fine. They have the pass rushers where, I've never said this about an Oklahoma team. They'll probably have a top 10 defense in the entire country this year for Oklahoma, and they always have a top 10 offense. Their non-conference is not that tough. They get Tulane, they get like Abilene Christian and Nebraska. They should beat every single one of them. Nebraska's probably the easiest game out of all of them, just to be honest. Nebraska's horrible. But they get Texas in the middle of the season. Texas has a young quarterback, brand new coach. They get Iowa State late, which means that secondary has time to gel. That team's going to be rolling. I just don't see anybody being able to hang with Oklahoma. And I really, and this is crazy, I don't even know if there's one or two teams in the country that can hang with Oklahoma this year. They bring in plenty of transfers that are great. The running back out of Tennessee, Eric Gray, might be the best running back in the Big 12. And you combine him with Kennedy Brooks, who is the number one returning running back in the Big 12. So you have the two best running backs. You got Isaiah Thomas at edge. You got Nick Bonito at edge, Jalen Redmond at defensive tackle, Jadon Hazelwood at wide receiver. You got Marvin Mills at wide receiver. There's literally not a weak spot on this team, man. And Lincoln Riley, if you don't make it to the national championship this year, I just don't know what to tell you. Like, this team's that good. I don't know if there will be a conference foe that can hang within single digits of Oklahoma this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And Scott Frost has entered the stream now.
That's fine. Listen, if he tells you anything other than Nebraska is the bottom tier Big Ten team, I don't want to hear it.
Oh boy, definitely can't wait to do the Big Ten. I mean, yeah, that's gonna be. Oof. Oh boy, that's another story in itself. My goodness, the children of the coin. I don't know what they're gonna do out there in Nebraska, in Lincoln, Nebraska, but yeah,
they're still looking at the '90s, man. Like, they haven't been good since like the year I was born. That tells you something.
It's been a while. Yeah, it's been a while. Definitely. Tommy Frazier isn't walking through that door. Scott Frost is walking, but he's a coach now, but not the quarterback. But the older version of Scott Frost.
Exactly. Yeah, Scott Frost, who can't run that 40 anymore.
Correct. So yeah, we're gonna put a bow on this week's Big 12 preview. So Zach, definitely final thoughts for the preview, and then also you got any upcoming projects, anything you want to let us know about that we can tune in for?
Man, I just appreciate you having me on, man. We've pretty much shifted to YouTube just about full time now, man. So you can just look us up there, the Blue Bloods CFB podcast, man. We got a bunch of interviews, man. We had CJ Brewer this week, all from Coastal Carolina, defensive lineman. We Jaron Morris from Texas State, Logan Bacchus from South Dakota State. Man, we got plenty of interviews if that's what you want. We had Eric Barrier from Eastern Washington, man, the #1 FCS quarterback. So we got some big players on the docket, man. Some players from North Carolina A&T, Alcorn, and we're working on getting some Power 5 interviews, man. So if y'all want some college football content, man, make sure to subscribe there.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. Once again, it's always a pleasure linking up with you. Definitely talking college football. It's probably one of my favorite moments of the summer, no doubt. So yeah, so most definitely. So next week we're gonna be talking about the greatest conference that there is, the Atlantic Coast Conference. Excuse my bias, but we'll definitely talk about the Atlantic Coast Conference next week, followed by the Big Ten, and then the granddaddy of them all, the SEC, the potentially a 16-team conference down the line, or more. Like you said, you even suggested 2 additional teams to add to the fold too. So yeah, but most definitely. Once again, another great preview. Definitely appreciate you for coming through this week, Zach. And
absolutely, man.
We'll do the Atlantic Coast Conference next week, man. We'll catch you guys next week. This has been a special Couch Coach Live.